Karen Thompson had always considered herself a woman of the world. She lived in a fancy suburb back home, drove an expensive car, and prided herself on her sharp tongue. But this trip to London was supposed to be different. It was her chance to experience culture, as she often boasted to her friends. However, Karen's idea of experiencing culture mostly involved snapping selfies with landmarks and making snarky comments about everything she didn't understand. On this particular afternoon, Karen found herself standing near Buckingham Palace, surrounded by tourists eagerly snapping photos of the iconic royal guards. The guards stood tall and still, dressed in their striking red uniforms and towering bearskin hats. To most people, they were symbols of tradition and discipline, but to Karen, they seemed like props in what she called a ridiculous show. "Look at them," Karen muttered under her breath to no one in particular. "Just standing there like statues. What's the point? Do they even do anything useful?" A few nearby tourists exchanged glances but said nothing. Karen wasn't known for taking criticism well, so it was easier to let her rant than engage. Her irritation grew when she approached one of the guards directly. He was young, with a perfectly stoic expression that made him look almost robotic. Karen leaned closer, waving her hand dramatically in front of his face. "Hello, Earth to Soldier Boy. Can you blink or something? Or are you programmed not to move?" The guard didn't flinch. His unwavering composure only fueled Karen's frustration. She hated being ignored, especially by someone whose job she clearly didn't respect. Her voice rose as she continued her tirade. "You know what? This is ridiculous. You're just wasting everyone's time, and probably our tax dollars too." A small crowd began to gather around her, some amused, others annoyed. Nearby, a street artist was setting up his easel, cans of paint scattered around his feet. One of the cans caught Karen's eye, a bright, obnoxious shade of blue. An idea sparked in her mind, childish and impulsive. Without thinking twice, she grabbed the can and marched back toward the guard. "This'll get your attention," she declared loudly, holding the can high above her head. Before anyone could stop her, she poured the entire contents over the guard's immaculate uniform. Bright blue paint dripped down his chest, staining the fabric and pooling on the ground beneath him. Gasps rippled through the crowd as phones whipped out to capture the shocking moment. For a split second, Karen felt triumphant. She crossed her arms smugly, expecting applause or laughter, or at least some kind of reaction from the guard. But there was nothing. Not a twitch, not a word. It was as if he hadn't even noticed. That's when reality began to sink in. People weren't cheering. They were staring at her with wide eyes and open mouths. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered angrily among themselves. Someone shouted, "How dare you disrespect them like that?" Another yelled, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen suddenly felt very small. For the first time, she realized she might have gone too far. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down, trying to play it off as a harmless prank. "Relax, people. It's just paint," she snapped defensively. "It'll wash off, right?" Wrong. By the end of the day, videos of the incident would spread across the globe, turning Karen into an overnight sensation, but not the kind she'd ever dreamed of. And as she walked away from the scene, oblivious to the storm brewing online, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Within hours of Karen's shocking stunt, the video of her pouring paint on the royal guard had gone viral. Social media platforms lit up with clips of the incident, each one accompanied by captions like "Tourist attacks royal guard" and "Entitled visitor shows zero respect." The internet was merciless. Comment sections swelled with outrage, jokes, and heated debates about privilege, entitlement, and cultural disrespect. Memes mocking Karen flooded timelines, turning her into an overnight laughingstock. Back at her hotel, Karen remained blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing online. She spent the evening scrolling through shopping apps and planning her next day's itinerary, completely oblivious to the fact that millions of people were watching her every move, or rather, her infamous moment, on repeat. It wasn't until breakfast the following morning that reality began to creep in. As Karen entered the hotel lobby, she noticed a few guests staring at her. At first, she assumed they recognized her expensive designer handbag or stylish outfit, things she often used to gauge her social status. But then she heard whispers. One woman muttered something under her breath while shaking her head disapprovingly. A man sitting nearby openly pointed at her and said loudly to his companion, "That's her. That's the crazy lady from the video." Karen froze mid-step, her stomach sinking. She tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding, plastering on a confident smile as she approached the front desk to ask for directions. But instead of helpful advice, she received icy glares from the staff. Even the concierge avoided making direct eye contact with her. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly uncomfortable in public. Outside, things only got worse. As she walked toward Hyde Park, hoping to clear her head, strangers started approaching her. Some shouted insults, calling her names she couldn't bring herself to repeat later. Others demanded explanations, accusing her of ruining their respect for tourists and tarnishing the reputation of visitors everywhere. A group of teenagers even followed her for a block, filming her on their phones and taunting her with questions like, "Why'd you do it? Was it worth it?" Karen's initial reaction was denial. She told herself these people were overreacting. It was just paint, after all. She hadn't meant any real harm. How could everyone take such a silly prank so seriously? Yet, deep down, doubt began to creep in. Why had she done it? What had possessed her to act so recklessly? By late afternoon, news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines blared across television screens in cafes and shops. American tourist faces backlash after vandalizing Royal Guard. Journalists speculated about her motives, with many labeling her behavior as not just disrespectful, but potentially racist. They highlighted how Karen's comments during the incident, calling the guards useless and questioning their purpose, reflected broader stereotypes about minority groups serving in ceremonial roles within the British military. Karen finally saw the full extent of the fallout when she returned to her hotel room and turned on the TV. There she was, front and center, her face plastered across every major network. Reporters dissected her actions frame by frame, analyzing everything from her tone of voice to the smirk on her face. Social media influencers weighed in, condemning her behavior and urging followers to hold her accountable. Celebrities joined the conversation, using hashtags like #RespectTradition and #ApologiesKaren. Panicked, Karen tried deleting her social media accounts, hoping to avoid further scrutiny. But it was too late. Screenshots of old posts surfaced, revealing years of similarly entitled and inflammatory remarks. People dug up photos of her posing arrogantly in exotic locations, captioned with captions like, "Another country, another conquest." The more they uncovered, the angrier the public became. For the first time in her privileged life, Karen realized she wasn't untouchable. Her actions had consequences, not just for herself, but for countless others who might now face judgment because of her reckless behavior. As night fell over London, Karen sat alone in her hotel room, clutching her phone and staring blankly at the glowing screen. The woman who once thrived on attention now wished she could disappear entirely. The next morning, Karen's worst fears came true. There was a sharp knock on her hotel room door early in the morning, and when she opened it, 2 police officers stood there with stern expressions. They informed her that she was being summoned to the station for questioning regarding an act of vandalism against a member of the Royal Guard. Karen's heart sank as she realized the situation was far more serious than she had imagined. Dressed hastily in yesterday's clothes, Karen followed the officers to the station, where she was formally charged with criminal damage and public disorder offenses. The weight of the legal jargon hit her hard. Words like vandalism, malicious intent, and disrespecting national symbols were thrown around, making her feel smaller with each passing moment. To make matters worse, Prosecutors argued that her actions weren't just a harmless prank, but carried undertones of racial bias. They pointed out her dismissive remarks about the guards, who often come from diverse ethnic backgrounds, including black and minority communities. Karen tried to defend herself, insisting that she hadn't meant anything by it. It was just paint, she protested, her voice trembling. But the authorities didn't seem swayed. They explained that the royal guards weren't just ordinary soldiers. They represented centuries of tradition, discipline, and respect for the monarchy. Defacing their uniform wasn't just an attack on an individual. It was seen as an insult to British heritage and values. At her court appearance days later, Karen arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer blazer, hoping to project confidence despite feeling utterly terrified. Reporters packed the courtroom, snapping photos and scribbling notes as she took her seat. The prosecution painted her as reckless and entitled, emphasizing how her behavior had sparked outrage not only in the UK but worldwide. Her defense attorney struggled to counter these claims, especially since Karen's public statements thus far had done little to help her case. When asked why she had targeted the guard, Karen stammered something vague about frustration and boredom, which only made her sound more callous. The judge listened carefully before delivering his verdict. Karen was fined heavily and ordered to issue formal written apologies to both the royal family and the specific guard she had humiliated. Additionally, she was banned from leaving the country until all penalties were paid and obligations fulfilled. For Karen, this was devastating news. She had planned to return home after her vacation, back to her comfortable life where none of this would have mattered, or so she thought. Outside the courthouse, reporters bombarded her with questions. "Do you regret your actions?" one shouted. Another pressed, "What do you think about people calling you racist?" Karen, overwhelmed and exhausted, pushed through the crowd without answering. She climbed into a taxi, tears streaming down her face, realizing that her attempts to justify herself had only dug her deeper into trouble. Back at the hotel, Karen stared at the blank sheet of paper in front of her, tasked with writing those mandatory apologies. Every word felt forced, awkward, and insincere. How could she possibly convey remorse for something she still didn't fully understand? Yet, she knew she had no choice. If she refused, the consequences would be even worse, perhaps jail time or additional fines. So, reluctantly, she began drafting generic lines like, "I apologize for my actions, and I never intended to cause harm." But deep down, she wondered if anyone would believe her. As days turned into weeks, Karen's financial resources dwindled rapidly. Paying the fine wiped out a significant chunk of her savings, leaving her with barely enough to cover her extended stay in London. Her credit cards maxed out, and calls from her bank grew increasingly frequent. Friends and family back home stopped responding to her messages, unwilling to associate themselves with someone embroiled in such scandal. Even the hotel staff treated her coldly, refusing to make eye contact or engage in small talk. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly trapped, not just legally, but emotionally and socially. She had always prided herself on her independence and ability to navigate any situation. Yet here she was, stuck in a foreign city, drowning in shame and regret. As she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that her life was unraveling faster than she could comprehend. What had started as a fleeting moment of childish rebellion had spiraled into a nightmare she couldn't escape. And though she clung to the hope that things might improve, deep down, she feared the worst was yet to come. Back home, Karen's life continued to fall apart piece by piece. News of her actions had traveled faster than she could have ever imagined, and the fallout was brutal. Friends who once laughed at her jokes and neighbors who waved hello now avoided her like the plague. When she finally returned to her suburban neighborhood, after weeks of delays caused by her travel ban lifting, she found herself greeted not with warmth, but with icy silence. Cars slowed down as they passed her house, drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the infamous paint woman. Some even snapped photos of her front yard, turning her home into an unofficial tourist attraction. Her husband, Mark, couldn't take it anymore. He had stood by her side during the initial scandal, hoping against hope that it would blow over quickly. But as the days dragged on, the pressure became unbearable. His colleagues mocked him at work, calling him Mr. Royal Guard behind his back. Friends stopped inviting them to dinner parties, afraid of being associated with Karen's toxic reputation. One evening, after yet another heated argument about the future, Mark finally broke down. "I can't keep doing this," he told her, his voice trembling with frustration. "You've ruined everything, not just your life, but ours too." A few weeks later, Mark filed for divorce. The court proceedings were messy and humiliating, with lawyers dissecting every detail of their marriage in public documents. Neighbors whispered about how Karen's arrogance had driven a wedge between them. Her children, two teenagers who had always adored her, began pulling away. They barely spoke to her, choosing instead to spend most of their time at friends' houses or with their father. For Karen, losing her family felt like the final nail in the coffin. She had always defined herself by her role as a wife and mother, and now both identities were stripped away. Work wasn't any kinder. Karen had worked hard to climb the corporate ladder at a prestigious marketing firm, earning accolades for her sharp instincts and networking skills. But now, her employers saw her as a liability. Clients demanded explanations for why they should continue working with someone whose name was synonymous with controversy. Colleagues whispered about her downfall in hushed tones during meetings, casting judgmental glances her way. Eventually, the board called her into a private meeting. With forced politeness, they informed her that her position was no longer tenable. "It's nothing personal," they said, though their tone suggested otherwise. "But we have to think about the company's image." Unemployed and ostracized, Karen spiraled further into despair. Social media didn't offer any reprieve either. Trolls flooded her accounts with hateful messages, mocking her appearance, her choices, and her failed attempts at redemption. Memes featuring her face circulated endlessly, each one more cruel than the last. At first, she tried blocking users and deleting comments, but it was like trying to plug a dam with her fingers. The negativity kept pouring in from all sides. Finally, she deactivated her profiles altogether, cutting herself off from the digital world she once thrived in. Isolation set in quickly. Without her usual social circles, Karen struggled to find anyone willing to listen to her side of the story. Even casual acquaintances treated her with thinly veiled contempt. Once, while grocery shopping, a woman in line behind her loudly accused her of ruining Britain's reputation. Others joined in, berating her until she abandoned her cart and fled the store in tears. It seemed there was nowhere she could go without facing reminders of what she had done. As months passed, Karen realized that her old life was gone forever. The privileges she had taken for granted, respect, admiration, security, were replaced by loneliness and shame. Yet, amid the wreckage, a small part of her began to question whether she truly deserved better. Hadn't she been the one to sow the seeds of her own destruction? These thoughts gnawed at her, planting the first tiny seeds of self-awareness. For the first time, Karen wondered if maybe, just maybe, she needed to change, not because the world expected it, but because she owed it to herself. Desperate to survive, Karen swallowed her pride and took on jobs that were far beneath her previous lifestyle. She started working long hours at a fast food chain near her apartment, flipping burgers and serving customers who often recognized her from the infamous video. Some patrons would smirk or whisper to their friends as they placed their orders, while others openly mocked her. "Aren't you the paint lady?" One teenager sneered during a busy lunch rush. Karen forced herself to smile politely, handing over the tray with trembling hands. It was humiliating, but she reminded herself that rent didn't pay itself. Her new coworkers weren't much kinder. Most of them were younger than her, fresh out of high school or college, and saw her as an oddity, a middle-aged woman with expensive taste stuck in a dead-end job. They nicknamed her Queen Karen behind her back, laughing about how someone so entitled had ended up scrubbing grease off fryers. At first, Karen tried to distance herself, eating alone in the break room or keeping her head down during shifts. But as weeks turned into months, she realized isolation wasn't helping. Slowly, she began making an effort to connect, even if it meant swallowing her ego. One day, a coworker named Mia approached her after closing time. Mia was in her early 20s, with a warm smile and a no-nonsense attitude. Unlike the others, she didn't seem interested in mocking Karen. Instead, she offered advice. "Look, I get it. You've been through a lot," Maya said gently. "But people aren't gonna respect you unless you show them you're willing to earn it." Those words struck a chord deep within Karen. For years, she had expected respect simply because of who she was, her wealth, her status, her confidence. Now, stripped of all those things, she understood what Mia meant. Respect had to be earned, not demanded. Determined to prove herself, Karen threw herself into her work. She arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for extra shifts whenever possible. She learned everyone's names, remembered regular customers' orders, and even helped train new employees. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Over time, some of her coworkers softened toward her, treating her less like a joke and more like part of the team. It wasn't friendship, exactly, but it was something, a fragile sense of belonging that Karen hadn't felt in years. Despite these small victories, life outside of work remained bleak. One evening, as Karen walked home from her shift, she was ambushed by a group of strangers. They had clearly been drinking, their voices slurred and aggressive. "Hey, isn't that the crazy tourist?" one of them shouted, pointing at her. Before she could react, another stepped forward, hurling insults about her behavior in London. Someone threw a half-empty soda can at her feet, narrowly missing her shoes. Terrified, Karen clutched her bag tightly and quickened her pace, heart pounding in her chest. The harassment continued until she reached her building, where she collapsed onto the stairs, shaking uncontrollably. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, fear mingled with shame. How had she let things get this bad? Wasn't she supposed to be strong, untouchable? The realization hit her hard. She wasn't invincible. In fact, she was painfully vulnerable, and the world had no qualms about reminding her of it. But amidst the darkness, there were moments of clarity. Sitting alone in her tiny apartment, Karen began reflecting on her past. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the countless times she had belittled others without realizing it. She thought about the royal guard, standing stoically despite her cruel act, and wondered how he must have felt. Had he gone home that night angry, hurt, or perhaps indifferent? Did his family see the video? Did they feel embarrassed for him, or proud of his restraint? These questions haunted her, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. For the first time, Karen admitted that maybe she wasn't the victim here. Maybe she had caused real harm, not just to the guard, but to everyone who saw her actions as representative of larger issues like privilege and prejudice. The weight of that realization was crushing, yet strangely liberating. If she had made mistakes, then perhaps she could also make amends. And though the road ahead seemed impossibly steep, Karen resolved to try, for her own sake, if nothing else. Haunted by guilt and regret, Karen decided it was time to take responsibility for her actions. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, she could start making things right. Her first step was enrolling in therapy, something she had always dismissed as unnecessary in the past. Sitting in the therapist's office for the first time, Karen felt awkward and out of place. The soft lighting and calming decor only made her feel more exposed, like her flaws were on full display. Her therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Patel, encouraged Karen to dig deep into why she had acted the way she did. At first, Karen resisted, brushing off her behavior as a stupid mistake or blaming external factors like stress and frustration. But Dr. Patel gently pushed back, asking probing questions that forced Karen to confront uncomfortable truths. Why had she felt entitled to lash out at someone who hadn't done anything to her? What assumptions had she been making about people based on their roles or appearances? Slowly, painfully, Karen began to see patterns in her thoughts and behaviors, patterns rooted in privilege, entitlement, and unconscious bias. Through therapy, Karen also started attending workshops focused on cultural sensitivity and racial awareness. These sessions were eye-opening, though not always easy. She sat among strangers, listening to stories from individuals who had faced discrimination and prejudice daily. Some shared experiences of being stereotyped or dismissed because of their race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic background. Others talked about how seemingly harmless comments or actions could carry deeper meanings, perpetuating harmful narratives. Karen listened intently, feeling a mix of shame and empathy. For the first time, she realized how her own words and actions might have contributed to those same narratives. Determined to make amends, Karen began volunteering at local community centers. Her initial goal was simple: to stay busy and avoid dwelling on her mistakes. But as she spent more time working alongside people from diverse backgrounds, she found herself genuinely enjoying the experience. She helped organize events, tutored children after school, and even joined a program aimed at fostering understanding between different cultures. Though some volunteers were initially wary of her presence, whispers of "Isn't that the paint lady?" followed her around. The sincerity of her efforts eventually won them over. One day, while helping set up for a multicultural festival, Karen struck up a conversation with a man named Jamal, who ran a nonprofit organization supporting underprivileged youth. Jamal was warm and welcoming, despite clearly recognizing her. When Karen hesitantly introduced herself, he simply smiled and said, "Everyone deserves a second chance. You just have to prove you mean it." His words stuck with her, reinforcing her resolve to change. As months passed, Karen noticed subtle shifts in how others treated her. While not everyone forgave her outright, many appreciated her willingness to listen and learn. Coworkers at the fast food restaurant stopped calling her Queen Karen, instead treating her as part of the team. Even Mia, her coworker turned mentor, admitted one evening, "You're not half bad, you know. Keep going." Still, redemption wasn't easy. Online trolls continued to harass her, and old acquaintances remained distant. Yet, Karen no longer craved their approval. Instead, she focused on becoming someone worthy of respect, not because of her past, but in spite of it. Therapy taught her patience, volunteering gave her purpose, and self-reflection brought clarity. For the first time in years, Karen felt hopeful about the future. She didn't expect forgiveness overnight, but she understood that real change took time, and she was willing to put in the work. After months of therapy, volunteering, and quiet introspection, Karen made a decision that terrified her. She would publicly apologize for her actions. She knew it wouldn't fix everything. Some wounds ran too deep for words to heal, but she hoped it might be a step toward accountability. With the help of Dr. Patel and Jamal, she prepared carefully, rehearsing what she wanted to say and anticipating the backlash she was sure would follow. The opportunity came when a local television station invited her to participate in an interview about her journey. At first, Karen hesitated, fearing the spotlight would only reopen old wounds, but Jamal encouraged her, reminding her that silence could sometimes speak louder than words. "People need to hear your story," he said firmly. "Not because you deserve sympathy, but because it shows others that change is possible." On the day of the interview, Karen dressed simply, avoiding anything flashy or attention-grabbing. As she sat across from the host, a seasoned journalist known for his tough questions, her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay composed. The host began by showing clips of the infamous paint incident, pausing to highlight comments from viewers who had called her behavior disrespectful and racially motivated. Then, turning to Karen, he asked bluntly, "Why should anyone believe you've changed?" Karen took a deep breath before responding. Her voice wavered at first, but as she spoke, it grew stronger. "I can't undo what I did," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. and I know no apology will ever erase the harm I caused. But I want to take responsibility for my actions. That day wasn't just about paint. It was about disrespecting someone who deserved better. It was about arrogance and ignorance, and I'm so sorry for that." She went on to explain how the incident had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. She talked about her privilege, her biases, and the way she had unintentionally hurt others throughout her life. She shared stories from her volunteer work, describing how interacting with people from different backgrounds had opened her eyes to perspectives she'd never considered before. "I used to think I knew everything," she confessed. "But now I realize how much I didn't, and still don't understand. I'm learning, though, and I promise to keep trying." The interview ended with mixed reactions. Some viewers praised Karen's honesty, saying her apology felt genuine. Others dismissed it as performative, accusing her of seeking pity or redemption for selfish reasons. Social media erupted once again, with hashtags like #KarenApology trending alongside debates about whether forgiveness was warranted. Critics pointed out that apologies couldn't undo systemic issues, while supporters argued that personal growth mattered, even if it came late. Despite the divided response, Karen felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since the incident, she had faced the world without excuses or defensiveness. Whether people believed her or not, she had taken ownership of her mistakes, and that alone gave her a sense of peace. In the weeks that followed, Karen decided to write a memoir detailing her fall from grace and the lessons she had learned along the way. Writing it was painful, forcing her to relive moments she'd rather forget, but also cathartic. She titled it "Stains We Leave Behind," using the metaphor of paint to explore themes of regret, accountability, and transformation. Though critics accused her of profiting off controversy, Karen donated all proceeds to organizations promoting equality and cultural understanding. While the book didn't become a bestseller, it sparked important conversations among readers. Book clubs discussed its messages during meetings, and educators incorporated excerpts into discussions about privilege and prejudice. For Karen, this was enough. She didn't seek fame or fortune anymore. She simply wanted to contribute something meaningful, even if it meant starting small. As she signed copies at a modest bookstore event, Karen noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Mia, her former coworker, holding a copy of the book with a tentative smile. "Good job," Maya said softly, handing over the book to sign. Karen smiled back, feeling a flicker of gratitude. Redemption might not come overnight, but every little step counted. And for now, that was enough. Years passed, and Karen's life settled into a rhythm far removed from the chaos of her past. The headlines about her faded, replaced by newer scandals and fleeting controversies. While her name would always be tied to that infamous video, Karen no longer felt defined by it. Instead, she embraced a quieter existence, one built on humility, hard work, and small acts of kindness. She moved out of the city to a modest apartment in a friendly suburban neighborhood where few people recognized her. Her days were filled with routine but meaningful tasks: stocking shelves at a local grocery store, volunteering at a community garden, and mentoring teenagers through Jamal's nonprofit organization. These roles gave her purpose, allowing her to connect with others without pretense or arrogance. She wasn't seeking admiration. She just wanted to make a difference, however small. Her relationship with her children slowly improved as well. At first, they had struggled to forgive her, especially after their parents' bitter divorce. But over time, they began to see glimpses of the person she was trying to become. During weekend visits, Karen cooked their favorite meals, listened intently to their stories, and resisted the urge to lecture or criticize. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments of tension, but the bond between them grew stronger with each passing year. Her youngest even joked once, "Mom, you're actually kind of cool now." Karen laughed, though tears pricked her eyes. It was the highest compliment she could imagine. One crisp autumn morning, Karen received a letter in the mail. The envelope bore no return address, and curiosity piqued. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in neat block letters. Dear Karen, I am the guard you poured paint on all those years ago. I want you to know that I forgave you long ago. We all make mistakes, and I believe everyone deserves a second chance if they truly seek redemption. Keep doing the good work you're doing. It matters more than you think. Yours sincerely, Private James Carter. Karen read the note over and over, her hands trembling. She had often wondered how the guard had felt that day, whether he harbored resentment or anger toward her. To learn that he had forgiven her, not because he had to, but because he chose to, was overwhelming. Gratitude swelled within her, followed by a renewed determination to live up to his faith in her. That evening, Karen framed the letter and placed it on her living room wall, next to photos of her children and mementos from her volunteer work. Every time she looked at it, she remembered how far she had come, and how much farther she still had to go. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning, growing, and striving to be better every single day. Though scars remained, from strained friendships to lingering whispers online, Karen chose to focus on what she could control. She continued writing articles for local newspapers about overcoming prejudice and privilege, sharing her story not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that change is possible. She spoke at schools and community centers, encouraging young people to challenge their assumptions and treat others with empathy. For the first time in years, Karen felt content, not because she had regained everything she lost, but because she had found something far more valuable: peace. Peace with herself, peace with her past, and peace with the knowledge that while perfection was unattainable, progress wasn't. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught her resilience, humility, and the power of second chances. And so, Karen lived quietly, cherishing the simple joys life offered: laughter shared with loved ones, the satisfaction of a job well done, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, her story might inspire someone else to take that first step toward redemption. After all, if someone like her could find forgiveness, then perhaps anyone could.